Hi there, it's Kathy with Sycamore and Cotton, and today's video has three really beautiful trash to treasure projects that I finish in a French country look. I will admit though that I had trouble with two of them, and I included those troubles so that you can see it's not all roses with these projects that we bring to you each week. So let's waste no time and get started. For today's video, I got into my stash and pulled out some things that have been in there for quite a while. And not only that, but I pulled out a transfer set from IOD that I had ordered before Christmas. It was actually part of the Christmas release, and I just never got around to using it. And it's generic enough that it doesn't have to be Christmas. It's the one with the pomegranates and the fruit, and I don't have the name of it right now. I'll get it and hopefully put it on the screen for you. But I decided to also use some of my new milk paint, and this is in the color Flour Sack. I wanted to get a good crackle on this wood. I did nothing to prepare the wood other than clean it. And if you've used milk paint before, you know you mix equal portions of water and the powder. And I'm using my trusty stir stick, the end of a paintbrush, until I remember that I have actually a whisk that is specifically for this kind of small job. And following the directions, and this is Sweet Pickins paint, by the way, following the directions, I give it a really good mix and then let it sit for, I don't know, I think I let it sit for about 6 minutes or so. I decided this would be a good time to clean out my paintbrushes that have been sitting in that nasty water for days. I'm really abusive to my paintbrushes. So I put one coat of the milk paint on, and I started wondering, was I going to have enough? I used 3 tablespoons of each, 3 tablespoons of water, 3 tablespoons of the powder. I haven't used milk paint a whole lot, but I know from watching others on their YouTube channels that you can encourage the cracking by using a hairdryer. And so I pulled out my hairdryer after this first coat. Also, something that I learned from watching others is to never be alarmed by the first coat. It does get better. While I was painting, a piece of the wood came loose down on that corner. I had not noticed it. I thought that it was in perfect shape. But anyway, I did pull out my Titebond glue and glued that down and then clamped it and continued with drying the first coat. I hope maybe you can see some of the cracking that's starting to show. And now I'll move on to the second coat. And as you can see, the coverage is already getting better. This is the third coat, and you'll see that cracking. I've really gotten some good cracking, and covering it up does not cause any problems, and your cracking will come right through the top coat. I had just a tiny bit of the paint left over, and I decided to try to use it on these spindles that I cut for another project. After it was nice and dry, I used sandpaper to sand it down. As you can see there, I've had a little bit of chipping, and I wanted to make sure if there were any other places that were going to chip that I got all that off before I moved on to the next step of applying transfers. And I'm going to be honest about this. I wasn't sure, even though I've watched countless creators using transfers on their milk paint, I couldn't remember, do I need to seal it before I put on the transfers? And I decided just to try it, give it a go. I did wipe down the dust from sanding really, really well, and the transfer went on fairly easily. There were 2 or 3 very small places where it pulled the paint up, but it doesn't even show. The transfer is called Clementine, and as I mentioned earlier, it was part of the Christmas release, but it had been in my stash. I had not even opened the package. I tend to be thrifty with my transfers. I love them so much, and they're so beautiful, and sometimes I just want to hold on to them instead of use them. And I know that there's some other makers out there who feel the same way. And really, we just need to use them. And I'm trying to do more of that. I like to give a good once over the entire transfer with the tool that comes with it. And then I go back and begin removing the vellum as I rub with the tool. It took a little bit to get this completely transferred. I found that the more intricate the transfer is and the more typography there is, the longer that it takes. If you have a solid transfer that is just one piece, it will transfer a lot easier than if you've got pieces like this that are very intricate designs. Now, just as I anticipated, this needs something more. I knew it would because the transfer is kind of small for the size of the wood. And so I'm just trying to figure out what to do. And I decide I'm going to add some checks because I've really been into the Mackenzie Childs inspired style. So using a pencil, I had drawn on the squares, and now I'm using folk art paint in the color blue suede. I wanted that square that had the chipping, I wanted it to show, so I made sure that I left that square a white color, and that's kind of just how I decided to start. I chose this color because there's a butterfly in the transfer that is a similar color, and I thought that this would go well with it, but honestly I'm not sure. I'm going to go ahead and let you see to the end of getting these painted, and I don't know, I'm kind of changing my mind about it, but let's see. I'm definitely not sure what to think about this. So I took a picture of it when I got the checks done, and I sent it to a couple of groups that I'm in on Facebook of people who do this similar kind of work. And I had different suggestions. One was to frame the floral transfer on the middle. So I decided to do that, and as I was pulling up the tape, making that first stripe, it pulled up more of the paint, of the crackled milk paint. So I wasn't crazy about that, but I continue on until I get all four sides of a frame around that transfer. At this point, I'm really feeling not great about this piece. I do go ahead and finish the frame, as I mentioned, and it does continue pulling up some of the chalk paint, or milk paint, I'm sorry. But I decided I'm committed to this, so I'm going to take another step, and that's taking more milk paint and filling in some of the places where it crackled pretty badly. Because I think that crackle, even though I love crackle, I think it's just too much going on with the checks. And maybe I should have just covered the checks up. Who knows? But this is what I did. And it turned out okay doing that. I also went over some of the places in the frame part. And after that had dried, I had chosen some additional transfers to work in and try to expand the floral design of the middle space of this piece. And that made a big difference when I did that. But before I started applying them, of course, I had to let the paint dry. I also sanded the framed part just to, as you can see, it's quite darker than the checks. That's because they had been sanded. So I wanted to lighten up that blue on the framed part, and so sandpaper did that. And then I started applying the transfers, and I think I did the transfers offline because I was getting pretty exasperated by all this. My apologies for that, but I'm going to jump ahead now to how it looks after I've gotten all those extra transfers applied. And I really like what the transfers did. I added this greenery at the bottom because that section at the bottom, the main transfer wasn't centered on the board, so I had to do something to fill up that larger space at the bottom. I put in the butterfly and then the little bird on a branch in that top corner. There's a bumblebee and a couple of more butterflies, and I placed them so that they would kind of break up the boldness of the frame around the piece. And now I'm putting some clear wax on because I'm going to come back in with some dark oil to show off the crackle and also to pull the whole piece together, hopefully. I'm using Sweet Pickins Antique Oil Wax, and it's my first time using it. I can see why people like it so well, and I think I could have probably applied it without using the clear wax before, but I did want to be careful. I've made so many, I don't know, mistakes or second guessing this piece so much that I didn't want to end up being super dark. I may go back and add some more and let it sit on lay a little bit longer to age it a little more. I'm not sure. I want to hear you all's comments about this. I'm still not sure that I'm finished with it. I've thought about maybe adding some a little bit of gold touches to the checks and along that framed part. I don't know. You all help me out. Tell me what you would do. Or would you leave it as is? This is a trophy plaque, and I thrifted it, I think, for $1. And it's got the holes in it where the metal piece would be affixed to it. So I filled the holes with a little bit of spackle, and I sanded over it a little because it's not real wood, so I wanted to, and it was kind of slick, so I needed to make sure that the paint would stick. And I get all the labels off and sand it on both sides because I will give the back side a complete finish as well. And wiping that sand dust off, I come back in then with that same folk art paint in the color Blue Suede. I love this color, and I want you to look at the coverage I get. It's really good coverage. I almost could get by with one coat. It's just that good, but I do give it the one coat and then dry it and come back in for a second coat. I go over it with a fine grit sandpaper just to smooth down the paint and give it a nicer, smoother surface to apply the transfer to. I'm using the same transfer pack again, the Clementine transfers, and I already knew exactly which one I planned to use for this piece. I thought that the subtle colors of the transfer would go really well with the brighter, darker, moody color of the paint. This transfer went on a lot faster, in part because it's a chalk paint, and IOD transfers typically go on fairly easy with chalk paint. We always need to burnish our transfers after they've been applied, and I like to just do that with my hand, but be careful when you're rubbing over the transfer to make sure that you don't pull up any edges that may not be completely adhered. I felt like it needed something more and had in my mind to use some typography and gold ink. And I pulled out my Prima Redesign typography stamp, and it's all one piece, so it's a little bit challenging to use when you're only using portions of it, but I managed and got them on fairly well. After drying it, I then pulled out my clear wax, again the wonderful smelling lavender wax by Fusion, and apply a pretty generous coat. And then with a shop towel, I start wiping back and buffing in the wax. And that's when I noticed my ink was disappearing. It didn't take it off completely, but it definitely faded it. So now I'm currently waiting for it to dry. I painted over some of the places and I'm reapplying the ink. I'll need to spray it with a clear spray before I put anything else on it. I do like the way this is looking, but I am disappointed in myself for not remembering that this is not a permanent ink and therefore will come off. If you happened to watch last week's video, I think that it was, I had a similar problem using a blue ink on a rolling pin that I had to repaint and do over using a permanent ink. Both of those stamps, along with a whole bag of other colors, came from a bag that I thrifted a couple of years ago when I first started getting into stamping. And obviously I did not know the difference between archival or permanent inks and non-permanent inks. So I've learned my lesson now. I am happy with how this piece turned out, even if I did have that problem with it. Let me know what you think. The next project is a makeover of this decorative finial that I've had for a couple of years, I think, or maybe a year. As you can see, it had some bad places in it in the yellow parts. The rest of it was fine. There were no other cracks or breaks or anything like that. And I decided to paint the middle portion white. I'm using plaster by Waverly, and I'm going to come back with the checks that are the Mackenzie Child style using DIY's apothecary paint. And so I decided to paint the rest of the body and the finial top in that same color. Next is to draw on the lines very lightly with a pencil. And because this is already divided into strips, all I have to do is make the lines going around. Rather than measuring, I'm just eyeballing it. The great thing about this style is the checks, the stripes, they don't have to be perfect. Maybe that's why I like it so well. Can you see the pattern shaping up here? Now that the pattern is drawn on, I use my smallest paintbrush to start filling in using my apothecary paint and just start going around. And eventually I do change brushes. And this is a little bit tedious work, but honestly it goes so fast. And as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be perfect, especially if you're going to come back over with gold for trimming along the edges or putting a wax over it. Those kinds of things help cover up any imperfections. When I'm finished with the apothecary, I'll go back over all the white spots and get any places that I smeared the apothecary onto it. And here's how it's looking. The apothecary paint can be wet distressed, so I want to distress back to some of the original darker color, and I just spray a shop towel to start that. And then I end up just going all the way around from top to bottom, distressing, pulling back some of that paint to reveal some of the original underneath. And of course I didn't want any of the original yellowish orange showing through of that middle part. And fortunately, none of that white paint came off, so I did not have that problem. Next, I pulled out my clear wax and put it all over the entire piece. And of course, the reason for doing that is I'm coming back in with black wax, and I don't want to leave too much of it behind. And the clear wax allows me to control how much dark wax stays on the piece or how much I'm able to take off. The clear wax that I'm using is by Fusion, and it's the lavender scent. Oh my goodness, it smells so good. Another step that I like to take when using black wax is to thin it down a little bit. So I just pour a little of mineral spirits in the lid and just put my paintbrush in the wax and then dip it into the lid and thin that out, and it really helps be able to control how much you put on and how much you're able to take off of the dark wax. I pull out my hairdryer for the next step because I want to make sure that the wax is all dried and no globs of it left anywhere. And that next step is my gold paint pen, and then just go along some of the edges of the checks. And next I get out my rub and buff, and you can see how I've used that all the way down to it's just barely a little glob, but I keep squeezing and getting enough out to use. You know, I like to make the best out of all of my supplies. It's why I hold on to my IOD transfers, and it's why I use everything sparingly, and it's why I use it right down to the very last bit. Rub and buff is so fun to use. You just put it on. You can use a brush, but honestly, especially for something like this, your fingers work better. And here it is. Let me know what you think. I love it. This last project is basically just a refresh. I had thrifted these, gosh, probably 2 years ago, so they've been in my stash. My intent when I thrifted them was, of course, to paint them and put something over the cats. And when I pulled them out yesterday, I had full intention of doing just that. I have some IOD transfers that I wanted to use. In fact, I had planned on using the transfers that I used in the project just before this one. And once I got them out, was sitting at my desk and cleaning them, I realized, number one, they're in good condition. And number two, they're hand painted. And as much as it's not really my style, I thought these are too cute and too sweet for me to paint over. And I thought, surely there's someone out there who would like them. So I continued cleaning and thought, you know, the only thing really that these need besides this cleaning and a little bit of sanding to get just some scrapes and just, you know, where it had knocked into other painted things, is to put some oil on it and brighten up that wood. And I realized these are granny core, which is really popular and trending right now. And I thought, I'm going to try my luck at selling these on my Etsy shop. They're not really the style that I put in my booth, but I will try them on my Etsy shop because they are vintage. These are probably from the 70s. I would think at least the 80s. There was just a place where there was a little gouge in the wood and I could not sand it out, so I just pulled out my dark wax and kind of just blended around that area. And then I'll let it dry and then put on the wax. I was going to use my Howard's Feed and Restore, I think is what it's called, but I couldn't find it, so I just pulled out the mineral oil. It's good for shining up old wood. Oops, I poured out more than I intended, so I had plenty, and I did the front, the back, the sides on both pieces, and then you just let that soak into the wood, and it just helps to revive and refreshen the wood. And here they are. I think someone will like these for their home. I'm going to list them on my Etsy shop. And thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate the time that you spend with me. And here's a last view of the other 3 projects that I did in the French country. Thanks so much for watching. And please let me know which of these is your favorite. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I sure would appreciate it. It costs nothing and it really helps grow my business by showing YouTube that viewers find the content enjoyable and relatable, and they'll then push the videos out for more people to see. Thanks again so much, and I'll see you next time.